This morning's text comes from Isaiah 61, verses 1 through 4 and 8 through 11. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. They will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. They will renew the ruined cities that have been devastated for generations. For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. In my faithfulness, I will reward my people and make an everlasting covenant with them. Their descendants will be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them will acknowledge that they are the people the Lord has blessed. I delight greatly in the Lord. My soul rejoices in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation and arrayed me in a robe of his righteousness, as a bridegroom adorns his head like a priest, and a bride adorns herself with jewels. For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. These are words from the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Krista, for the reading. So, what does it mean to celebrate a Christian Christmas? You know, a Christian Christmas. Of course, we know all around the world, all kinds of people celebrate Christmas. What changes if we add that modifier, that adjective, Christian, to Christmas? I want to begin thinking about this by considering some Christmas carols together. I think there's basically three types of Christmas carols, but only one is really relevant to what I'm going to talk about, so we'll get there. But first, I think the first type is something like, isn't it cold outside? Shouldn't we be jolly? Shouldn't we be having a good time together? So we sing songs like Jingle Bells or Deck the Halls. A second type is something like, isn't the baby sweet? Isn't the baby sweet? So we sing songs like Away in a Manger or Silent Night. We sing songs about a baby. And I think there's also a third type of Christmas carol that has kind of disturbing and incomprehensible stuff going on in them. And of course, this is my favorite type of Christmas carol. You'll be delighted to know I'm interested in getting us thinking about disturbing and incomprehensible stuff. We wouldn't want it to be boring now, would we? Songs like Hark the Herald Angels Sing or We Three Kings are in this category. To think about it, what it might mean to reflect on a Christian Christmas, consider the strangeness of some of the lyrics from We Three Kings. Perhaps from verse 2, King forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign. Verse 3 is prayer and praising, voices raising, worshiping God on high. Verse 4, sorrowing, sighing, bleeding, dying, sealed in the stone-cold tomb. Is this usually what we think about on Christmas? And probably the strangest part, verse 5, glorious now, behold him arise, Christ and God and sacrifice. This language wasn't heard by us often enough. You would probably consider it very strange. King forever, worthy of all worship, dying, Christ, God, and sacrifice. What are we talking about? Or consider, hark the herald angels sing. Listen to how dense the language can be. Veiled in flesh, the Godhead see. Hail the incarnate deity. Does anyone talk like that anymore? Pleased in flesh with us to dwell, Jesus our Emmanuel. Or verse 3, very extensively. Hail the heaven-born Prince of Peace. Hail the Son of Righteousness. Light and life to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. Mild he lays his glory by, born that we may no more may die. Born to raise us from the earth, born to give us second birth. I think this is beautiful language and imagery. It's kind of strange. And every year we sing songs like these with lots of energy. People say with lots of gusto, lots of feeling and meaning. Songs loaded with words and these mind-bending ideas. And so I just wonder as I look at these words, have we thought deeply about what we would be singing? Have we taken seriously what our carols are saying? But more importantly, what are carols like these trying to do? What are they trying to do? Well, it's not celebrating the fun in snow. It's not about how sweet the baby is. We haven't gotten there. These songs attempt to answer some sort of question like, who is it that is at the center of the Christmas story? Who is it that's at the center of the Christmas story? And when I say who, I just don't mean a name. You know, like in Sunday school, every answer to the question was Jesus. Just say Jesus and you'll be right. I mean, who truly is this Jesus that a Christian says is their Lord? Or asked another way, what does this person who is at the center of the Christmas story do? What does this person do? Because in Advent, we ask these same questions as we begin our story about Jesus for the year once again over. As we begin with the beginning of the story in Advent, we ask, who is this that's at the center of our story that we're telling this year? And what does this person do? This is much of what Advent focuses on because a lot of Advent is setting up our proper expectations as we anticipate celebrating the birth of Jesus on Christmas Day. What are we looking forward to? Who exactly is it that comes to us as a child? What will this person do? And to keep our expectations in check, or perhaps transform them from whatever the rest of the world is telling us, in the midst of the rush to Christmas, we look to the Scriptures. We look to the words of the prophets. And we ask today, what does Isaiah 61 say? So I just want to read a little bit again, verses 1 through 3. It says, "The Spirit of the sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives, and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor." This is really important for Jesus' ministry. In the Gospel of Luke, when he begins his ministry, he starts in his hometown in Nazareth. This is what he quotes. He stands up or sits, unrolls the scroll, and reads from Isaiah 61. He applies these words to himself and says, "This is what my ministry is. This is what I am doing. To bring good news to the oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners, in the mourning, to provide comfort for those who grieve, to exchange their situation for his splendor. This is the Jesus that's at the center of the Christmas story. But there seems to be a kind of a disturbing and confusing twist. Did you notice it in our reading? The good news includes the day of vengeance of our God. I don't know about you, but I've never heard a message around Christmas time that included a word about the day of the vengeance of our God. But it's understandable. Preachers are thinking of all the new people, the visitors, the family that will attend like a Christmas Eve worship service. People think of the joy of Christmas, the good news that's preached of the birth of Jesus Christ. And if you aren't happy, there must be something wrong with you. There must be something wrong. People like the Jesus of Christmas, well, who can go wrong with saying Christ is born? But the day of vengeance of our God? Why would that come up? The prophet brings this up and calls it the message of good news. And we're probably sitting here thinking, how is that good news? So let's think of all the people that Isaiah lists. The oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners, the mourning. None of these folks will get much good news in the current state of things unless that order is upended, unless the state of things, the way things are, is changed, is destroyed. Things can't stay the same. And when that order is destroyed, rebuilding God's ancient ruins can begin. In the sense, we could say Jesus comes to end the world as we know it, because he's coming to bring good news to the poor, the oppressed, the brokenhearted, the captives, the prisoners, the mourners. And so we might ask, well, what about everybody else? Recently, I was asked a question, why aren't people rushing to come to Jesus? Because it's such good news. And I would answer by asking another question. Is the coming of Jesus, or just the good news of Jesus, good news? For Isaiah, it's wonderful news. Krista read it wonderfully at the end. It says, he rejoices, clothed in the hope of the good news this message brings. That's Isaiah. It's good news for Isaiah. But is it good news for everyone? Well, really, if it's good or bad news, just like anything else, depends on who you're telling, right? People like the Christmas Jesus, Christ is born. People like the Easter Jesus, Christ is risen. I love those too, man. We can talk about those all day. But there are people who come to worship with a Christian community maybe only those 2 days a year. Maybe that's all some people care to hear. I don't know. Maybe they come and they leave and they think they've heard all the good news. Christ is born. Christ is risen. But, people wanting their preferred good news is just normal. It's nothing new. Just go back to the Bible. People like Jesus in the Gospels when he gave them free food, right? Got a free meal? We're going to follow this guy. He tried to leave us, go across the lake. Nuh-uh, we're walking all the way around to find him so we can get another meal. People really like Jesus when he performed miracles. Look what this guy did. Come, follow him. But did they all like the message of Jesus? He's the one who often divided the room. When Jesus quoted today's text in his hometown in Nazareth, you remember that story? The quotation is accepted well by everyone. They're like, oh, this is great. But then Jesus did something. He kept talking. He went on to talk about how the widow of Nain was saved from starvation through the prophet Elijah. He went on to talk about Naaman the Syrian, who was healed of his leprosy by the prophet Elisha. And because these people that were brought deliverance in these Old Testament stories were not who these people wanted to hear to receive salvation and deliverance, you remember what happened? The people of Nazareth rejected Jesus, his message, and tried to throw him off a cliff. It's not good news, Jesus. It wasn't good news for them. Because it just might be that the good news for some people means bad news for other people. To those who are in power, to those who are comfortable now, to those who take advantage of others, to those who don't want to see the work of Jesus in Isaiah 61 accomplished. I mean, Isaiah says Jesus is going to come and turn all that stuff upside down. Jesus basically says, I'm going to come and end your world as you know it. Is that good news? Because God says this in verse 11 of our reading. For as the soil makes the sprout come up, and a garden causes seeds to grow, so the sovereign Lord will make righteousness and praise spring up before all nations. And I get the feeling that today's text is how this is going to come about. The good news is that Jesus is going to accomplish what the prophet says. The good news is he is going to bring comfort to people who need it. He's going to make righteousness and praise spring up everywhere. And Jesus will do it as God intends for it to happen. But I guess the real question is, will those people who hear it accept this as good news? So how does all this fit into our expectations of Christmas? How does all this roll up and fit together with what we're anticipating, what we know is coming, what we're going to celebrate for Christmas? Because we've been talking about Jesus as the center of the Christmas story and what Jesus does, right? So the rub is always, so now, what will we do? Will we embrace this story as good news? Will we be the people Isaiah is talking about, building up the ruins? Will we be those oaks of righteousness? Will we be those new people living in the new reality that the kingdom of Jesus brings? Well, perhaps we should just end where we began, and I'll say, what will it mean to celebrate a Christian Christmas? Amen.